Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today I want to give you the results of the past week of my life where I participated in what is known as the Food Stamp Challenge, also known as the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, aka SNAP, aka the SNAP Challenge, where you as an American are supposed to live off of the average allotment given out to families across this country per person for all of your meals for a set period of time. Now, for the year 2025, which is the year that I participated in the challenge, that is $6 per person per day. Now, to be clear, the entire intent and purpose of this challenge is to get people to be more considerate about poor people, which is good. It is a good, valuable thing to do. However, it's also disingenuous because it wants you to advocate for more benefits from the government to different various people in this country, and it's based on kind of a false premise because the program is called the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. You're not actually supposed to spend or live only off of food stamps for your entire food budget. And in fact, if you were so broke that you had to rely on food stamps more, you would actually get a larger allotment than the $6 per person per day. That being said, I have accepted this challenge, and one of the reasons why I decided to do so is because A, it is important to understand that people are struggling, whether the validity of the challenge makes sense or not, and B, oftentimes the people who do this challenge are rich CEOs or celebrities, and these people are completely and utterly out of touch, and when they buy food, they buy it as if they are buying what they normally eat, and then they say, oh my god, I was basically incapable of buying any food.
I can't stop thinking about food. Each night when I go to bed, I'm engulfed by a sick feeling that comes from eating too many carbs, and I felt so much anxiety about the possibility of running out of pasta. So, as you said, this really does change your outlook about what a family goes through when it's forced to live on food stamps.
Yeah, well, the reality, just as this last 6 days I've experienced is food begins to dominate your life. To be able to do this, you have to be very planful. When I went to the supermarket on the very first day to buy it, I had to figure out what I was going to buy for the entire week. And certain meals I made had to take me for 2 or 3 days. And I can remember I actually picked out a number of things, put it in my basket, and I went up to the checkout counter. And the reality was, Carol, I had put too many things in my basket. I had to return certain things because the checkout was more than my $25 that I wanted to spend at that point.
Now, my favorite example of this of all time has to be the celebrity known as Gwyneth Paltrow, because when she participated in the challenge, she ended up posting an image of the groceries that she bought, and honestly, it is chef kiss amazing, and part of the reason why it is chef's kiss amazing is because she was recommended to participate in this program by her private chef, and back then, the allotment for a week was $29, and she ended up buying this. This is one of the greatest images in the history of all humanity. It should be in a museum for how out of touch you have to be to buy this if your entire food budget was $29. There are only a couple of things in this image that make sense, and that could be the rice, the beans, maybe you could argue for the frozen peas, the onion, but she has 2 sets of onions, a yellow onion and a spring onion, and of course the eggs if eggs weren't priced as they were right now. Now, of course, one of the things that catches my eye almost immediately is the fact that this woman bought 6 limes. It looks like she's trying to make vegan tacos with all of this stuff, but instead she's like, this is what you get for 1 week of food. Oh my god, I care so hard about the poor, when in reality, she's just completely and utterly out of touch. Now, for comparison, this is my haul from the grocery store myself with an additional 20-pound bag of rice, which we will talk about a little bit later, because I've actually been broke in my life. I've actually bought food on a very tight budget, and of course, I want to genuinely try to complete this challenge rather than just have a virtue signal about how impossible it is. Therefore, we need more government benefits. But I want to give a couple of caveats about this particular challenge for you guys out there in the audience, so I'm being 100% transparent. So first and foremost, I'm using a budget of $12 a day. The reason why I'm doing so is because I cook for not only myself, but for my wife. So $6 per person per day with 2 people is $12 a day over the course of a week. One person would be $42, so my budget is actually $84. In addition to that, regardless of whether or not I eat anything that I buy, if it is perishable, it gets added to my total. So bananas, whatever I ended up getting in my particular image that you see right here, they're all going to be incorporated in the total if they perish within a week. However, and this is absolutely crucial for you guys to understand, anything that I buy that lasts way longer than a week, that is a non-perishable, I will be pricing based on what is used. That being said, I will be pricing based on what it costs at the grocery store at the time. So if I bought something in bulk a long time ago when it was on sale, I'm not going to be pricing based on the sale price that I would have paid back in the day. And a perfect example of this is the rice. So I ended up buying this rice at the grocery store for $18.99. Now I was actually going for a different brand. It was the Carolina brand for $10.99. However, it was not available at the store when I decided that I was going to buy it. So of course I ended up buying a more expensive one because I didn't want to get the store brand, because I'm also limiting my store brand purchases to about 3 items maximum. So even though throughout the course of this particular video I use the Carolina rice, which is much cheaper than the Canilla rice that you see right there pictured, I will be pricing based on the more expensive Canilla rice because that was available at the store at the time that I went there, and this is how committed I am to the process. But again, I'm pricing based on what I use because in reality, you get food stamp allocations at the beginning of the month and you can buy long term. And I think the secret to defeating this challenge is actually buying long term. Now, in addition to limiting myself to just 3 store brands or less, I'm also going to add additional restrictions to make this more difficult. And most of these are around convenience. A perfect example of this is that I decided not to buy dried beans, even though there's 11 servings per pound of dried beans compared to 3 for a can of dried beans. So it's extremely more cost effective. And the reason why is because it takes at least 8 hours in order to soak those beans, in order to get them ready. And as somebody who has been broke in the past, oftentimes I opted for the convenience, even though the other option was significantly cheaper. So I will be doing things like that throughout the course of this video to make it more difficult, because in reality, we are not machines. We're not people who make the exact accurate choice all the time. And again, there are definitely decisions that I made throughout the course of this video. There are definitely ideas that I came up with for meals that were just not that smart. Also, another caveat that I want to give to everybody out there in the audience. I'm not somebody who eats breakfast every day, and I'm also not someone who eats a lunch every day. However, throughout the course of this video, I decided that I had to price out a breakfast and or lunch option, which is something that I definitely did do, even though I might actually eat less than I'm actually giving myself credit for or charging myself for throughout the course of the week. And the same is true of my wife. So I might tell you that I'm using something for a couple of days, like a recipe for a breakfast, but in reality, I might have only did that once out of the 7 days and the other breakfast once out of the 7 days. But I will be charging the full cost each and every day for those items. Do you guys understand? Now, another rule that I have for this particular challenge is no dollar stores, no Dollar Tree, no Dollar General, no Family Dollar. I've seen so many different YouTube videos where people are like, I will feed my entire family for a month buying crap food over there, and I will not be doing that. And one final restriction that I placed on myself is that I restricted myself to just one purchase from a big box store where you buy stuff in bulk that requires a membership, you know, a Costco or BJ's or something of the equivalent. But don't worry about it. I completely wasted it on this sale of 6 cans of Spam, to which I used one, which prices my Spam at $2.71 for the 1 can that I used. But as we will go on throughout the course of the video, you will learn that this was probably my worst purchase of the entire process. Now, the first thing that we're going to start with is dinner for night 1, and that is going to be roasted chicken. Now, to be clear, it would be much smarter of me to break down the chicken into 10 individualized cuts. If you were really trying to save money, this is what you would do, because you could look at this chicken and realize you have 2 breasts, 2 legs, 2 thighs, 2 wings. You also have 2 tenderloins, and that is enough for 4 to 5 days worth of food for 2 people. But I'm not going to do that because, again, we're trying to eat as normally as possible, and in addition to that, not everybody makes the smartest decision because we are not machines. So the first thing that I do with this chicken is I actually salt and season it on both sides before I actually show you this video. By the way, I got to give the caveat that I've never actually filmed myself cooking before, so there are certain things that are missed, but as you could see, clearly this was already seasoned before, but I add additional salt, additional pepper. Also, I'm using MSG, oregano, garlic powder. I also add Sazon, which is a Badia seasoning. That is the red one. Adobo, which is a Goya seasoning. And by the way, I'm also assuming that you guys out there in the audience end up having seasonings. Now, of course, what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to make a butterball, and included in this butterball, which by the way has about half a stick of butter, and since I use one of my store brand items on this butter, it was priced at $3.99, so half a stick out of the 4 sticks would be 50 cents, and I'm going to put that in a separate bowl. I'm also going to add some Sofrito and Recaito. These are Goya products. Now, of course, you could make these homemade. These are something that Latin households often make homemade, but I figured if I'm going to give you guys advice on like how to actually do the meals and whatnot, it wouldn't make sense for me to tell you to make a homemade blend that is unique to the Caribbean that you probably don't normally make unless you're already a Latino from the Caribbean. So we're going to throw this in there. By the way, these were $2.50 per bottle, so this is $5, and I'm going to use them throughout the course of the week. So I'm spreading that cost around over the course of 7 days, which we will get into when we do the final price point. In addition to that, I have garlic cloves. Now this was $2.50 for the sleeve. There are 5 different bulbs in said sleeve, and I use about 2 full bulbs throughout the course of the week. But again, I'm adding that in for the butterball right there, and of course I end up mixing it up. I believe that there's cilantro in there, and I also use half of a jalapeno. Now the jalapeno that I bought was literally 1 jalapeno from the store. You can actually see it pictured right there, and this was 12 cents. Now even though I should be pricing in 6 cents into this particular dinner right here, I'm actually going to price in the full 12 cents because I should have used the whole jalapeno here, and here's the reason why. So I put this under the skin in order to balance it out. By the way, for those of you who are wondering how my turkey recipe works, it's pretty much the same thing except you scale it up for the turkey. However, I don't normally use yellow onions, and yellow onions, when they roast, they become sweeter, so I actually needed more spice, more jalapeno in order to counterbalance this, because the end product of this chicken under the skin mixture was actually for it to be more sweet than I was hoping for, than I was going for. So the whole jalapeno should have went in. It's getting priced in right here. It would be priced into my week total regardless because it's perishable in and around a week, even though I could probably stretch it a little bit longer. But yeah, the 12 cents is going in right there. So of course I get that under the skin. I end up seasoning the chicken again, salt, pepper. I use red pepper flakes, oregano, anything and everything that you guys want to put on your chicken at this point in time. Go ahead, have a great day. But in addition to that, I will also add that make sure you constantly salt this. Again, I salted and seasoned this for at least an hour prior to doing this step right here. And the reason why is that the salt will draw out some excess water in the chicken. It won't dry it out, but it will help add flavor throughout the course of the chicken. Now the butterball goes underneath the skin on both sides of the breast, and you may have to press it down in order to make sure it spreads evenly. But if it's not super even, or if there's a big bubble, don't worry about it because of course the butter will melt. Now, if the skin is not separating from the breast meat at the end near the cavity right here, you might have to take a paring knife, get up under in there and cut it. But it is very important that you don't break the skin. You just cut that transparent link between the skin and the breast meat. But again, the butterball goes right up in there, shove it in there, and any excess that you put in the cavity is totally fine. It's all flavor, it all builds. We're going to use every component of the chicken, so you want to make sure this is seasoned all over the place. Now, of course, I roast this chicken, which is around 5 pounds-ish, at 350 degrees in the oven for about an hour and a half, and this is the end result. Now, of course, you don't slice it right away hot out of the oven. Absolutely not. What you end up doing is you let it rest for at least a half hour. If you can let it rest for an hour, you will have ideal results. And when you slice it, what you should see, and you can see a little bit of it right there, is that under the skin, you will have that mixture that you made, the butterball, kind of coat coating everything in the breast meat. Now, I think it's important right now for us to price the chicken, so let me give you the calculations. So, we have $4.72 for the whole chicken, then we have 25 cents for the quarter of a stick of butter. Again, the butter was $4, the store brand version of it. There were 4 sticks. I used a quarter of one of the 4 sticks. That means it is 25 cents. We have the garlic sleeves. Now, there were 5 garlic bulbs in this particular pack. It was $2.50, meaning each one ends up costing 50 cents a piece. Now, I did not use half a bulb of garlic, but I'm just going to round up for simplicity because I didn't count the cloves properly. And then we have the cilantro, which was 99 cents. You divide that by 7 because I will use it throughout the course of the week, and that is 14 cents. We have the jalapeno, which I should have used all 12 cents worth of it at 12 cents. Then we have the Sofrito and Recaito, which I am pricing at 35 cents for what I used because I'm dividing it by 14 because I will use it in multiple things throughout each meal. And then we have the 27 cents, which is for the 3/4 of an onion used, for a grand total of $6.10 for this roasted chicken. All right, so let's move on to the sides. We'll talk about the beans next, because basically I have similar components in the beans. However, in addition to that, I use a little bit of this 50-cent Goya tomato sauce. And by the way, the beans that I'm working with are Roman beans, which are absolutely delicious. So one of the first things I do is I throw the onions down in the pan in order to saute. Also, I wanted to add a little bit of meatiness to these particular beans. And by the way, I should give the caveat as well that I'm neither Jewish nor Muslim, so there's a lot of pork throughout the course of this particular week. So I ended up going with Spam in this particular case, and I cut off about 1/5 of the Spam. Maybe you could say it's up to 1/3 of the Spam, chopped it up into little cubes, and threw it in with the onions. Now, to be clear, the Spam inclusion was not that great in my opinion. I ended up using the rest of the Spam for a later meal, so I'm telling you about this now. What I actually would recommend is what I did for the second set of beans, which of course was use this particular ham steak right here. So everything is going to be the same, but I will explain it to you as if I am doing it with the ham steak, which is my recommendation. The Spam was definitely a bad buy in my opinion. So of course, onions in, Spam in, then you go in with your garlic. Now after your Spam and onions have sauteed, what you want to do is throw in some Sofrito and Recaito into the pan to kind of cook out the tomatoiness of it with the mixture, again, after your ham and or Spam has been browned enough with your onions. You're also going to throw in your garlic, and I think inadvertently in one of these recipes, I had the cilantro on the cutting board and I also threw that in. That's a bit too early. You want to save that for later. Also, you probably want to crush the cilantro just prior to throwing it in your hands in order to bruise it to maximize the flavor that you're getting from the herbs. And again, you are salting and peppering. What you want to do is have the onions not sweat, but kind of brown a little bit so you can get some of that flavor in there. And then, of course, you dump your bean can in, which we use canned beans in this case. And then I use water, but I basically used 1/3 of a can of beans worth of water, which is the can that it came in. And by the way, I rinsed and drained the beans. I did not use the liquid that came with it before putting them in the pot. So then you put in the Goya tomato sauce, some Sofrito, some Recaito, a bunch of other seasonings, and it needs to be emphasized time and time again that for the Spam, you're going to reduce the sodium, but for the other version of the beans where you don't use ham or you use the ham that I recommend because it came out amazing, what you want to do is salt constantly and taste constantly. You want to get those sodium levels up, but also I'm going to give the caveat that I'm trying to reduce the liquid level by at least 1/3 so that it thickens up, which will happen over time. So you bring it to a boil and then you simmer it for about 20 minutes, stirring infrequently. The end result should be thicker, but of course we're going to refrigerate this and keep it for the next day after we have whatever we're going to eat today. And what you need to understand is that the longer it is in the pot, the more it's going to thicken and the flavors are going to develop. So these beans will actually be better the next day and the third day if you can extend their life for that long. Also, we're adding in MSG. Anybody who told you that MSG is not good is a terrible person. If you add this to your food, it will be absolutely excellent. Definitely use the MSG. Now, to be clear, I used Roman beans in this particular recipe, but it works just as well with pink beans, red kidney beans, pinto beans, and there's a version of black beans that could totally work like this. It would just be more of a Caribbean style black beans. Again, the majority of beans that you use will work with this, including those red Dominican beans, with varying results, but they're ultimately going to be good. Now let's price this out. So the can was $1.25. The remainder of the onion, which is the 1/4 of the onion left over from our chicken, was 9 cents. We have $1 for the ham/spam, even though this is actually more than the amount of spam was in there. I'm just going to price it like this for simplicity's sake. We have 10 cents for the 2 little baby cloves of garlic. We have 15 cents for the 2 ounces of Goya tomato sauce. Remember, that can was priced at 50 cents. We have 35 cents for the Sofrito and Recaito. And of course, we have another 14 cents for the cilantro, for a grand total of $3.89. So now we move on to the rice. And I just want to say, for everybody out there in the audience, if you want to cook perfect rice every time, get a rice cooker. Just get one. Get an Asian rice cooker. The Asians know how to deal with rice. However, if you don't have one, I will show you how to cook rice, and I will show you how to do it in a very simple way. Now, of course, this is applicable to long grain rice. Like I said, this is applicable either to the Goya rice or to the Canilla rice. Any kind of long grain, except for maybe basmati, this method will work. And the first thing you want to do is rinse the rice. And obviously, you're doing this in order to remove some of the excess starch. When the water runs clear, you have rinsed it enough. You're doing this with cold water, by the way. Then you get it back in the pot. Now, I'm making 2 cups of dried rice in this particular recipe, but make no mistake about it, this method will work proportionally. You just have to match the proportion. So I'm going to use 1 part water for 1 part rice. Now you can also use chicken stock. In fact, in the image right here, you will see the chicken stock. We will talk about that a little bit later. And the reason why I'm doing this is because that adds extra flavor. And if eggs were actually priced reasonably, I would use this rice, the leftover, in order to make egg fried rice. So again, 1 part liquid to 1 part rice. Now, what you want to do is add in a little bit of oil and, of course, a tablespoon of salt per 2 cups of rice. Now, I need you guys to understand this. It is basically impossible, although there are methods, to season rice later on after the fact. So anything you want to add in terms of seasoning, and in this particular case, it is salt, which is absolutely crucial, you want to add at this moment in time. You give it a little bit of a stir, and then you bring it to a boil. Now, once you first start seeing those first bubbles, what you want to do is cover it with the lid, but you want the lid to be wrapped in aluminum foil, because what we're doing is steaming the rice. We want all of that moisture to be absorbed by the rice, so you get delicious fluffy rice. Now, one of the ways I like to make sure that there is no steam escaping is I like to press really hard down on the lid until the aluminum foil actually bubbles up, because that indicates to me that the steam will be contained in this particular pot, and when it has nowhere else to go, it will go into the rice. Now, what you want to do is move that, for me, to a simmer burner, or turn down your fire to a simmer and simmer it anywhere between 12 and 15 minutes, and then you want to cut off the heat, and you just want to leave it there. Just don't touch it for an hour. Do not open the lid under any circumstances, and just let that steam go into the rice, and I guarantee it, if you do it this way, you will have fluffy rice stovetop. Although, again, I will emphasize, to get it perfect every time, just buy a rice cooker, buy an Asian rice cooker. Asians consume more rice than all of us combined, and they always have rice cookers in their homes because they work. Now, the rice is super simple to price. We are pricing the rice at 95 cents, and the reason for that is because we used a pound of rice, and when you divide the price of the 20-pound bag at $18.99 by 20, because it was a 20-pound bag, you end up with 95 cents. And this brings our grand total for this roast chicken, rice, and beans combination to $10.94. Now, you guys might be thinking to yourselves, there is no way already that this comes in under the $12 per day for you and your wife. And that is true. If we were to eat all of this food this particular evening, that would not be the case. But the fact of the matter is, the wife and I do not eat a whole chicken, 2 full cups of rice, and a full can of beans with all the things that we threw in there in a single day. In fact, it takes us 3 days to eat this. That seems like an average reasonable time for you guys out there in the audience to eat an entire chicken. And by the way, my recommendation for the eating order of the chicken is to eat the breast meat first, because that is the meat that is prone to dry out the most on reheating, and then eat every other component of the chicken. I would go for the thigh second, because that's the best part of the meat, and all the seasoning will settle in. And yeah, this meal right here lasted us for 3 dinners. And by the way, my wife took chicken with her to work for lunch one of the days, which I'm not even counting as a lunch because I have separate lunches for this particular video. But when you price it out over the course of 3 days, this is definitely a very economical meal. When you divide the $10.94 by 3, because we eat all of this over the course of 3 days, what you end up with is $3.65 per dinner for 3 days. That's pretty damn good. Now let's move on to breakfast. And honestly, there are 2 breakfast items that I have for you guys out there in the audience. And the reason for these particular items is because I like eggs. Eggs were too expensive, so I ended up having to not choose eggs. So if these are not the most desirable breakfast items, then sue me. Just relax. So the first thing that I made was banana pancakes. My ingredients were banana and also complete pancake mix, which was one of my store brand items. So the first thing that you want to do is take your banana. And by the way, one of the great things about this particular recipe is if your banana is starting to brown on the outside, it works just as well. You throw it into a cup and then you mash it with a fork in order to make it into a banana-like paste. Then you add in your dry pancake mix. Now, in this particular case, the store brand pancake mix costs $2.50. The serving size, which they say there's 15 of them in here, is half a cup. But weirdly enough, even though the serving size is half a cup, the smallest denomination on the box that they recommend you make is 2/3 of a cup. Now, this particular recipe I made for myself in order to record it, so it actually only has 1 banana and 1/3 of a cup of pancake mix, which prices in and around 11 cents in terms of pancake mix, and the banana is actually more costly than that because I paid $1.52 for those bananas, and I'm going to use them throughout the course of the week, so I'm pricing this based on its proportion. Now, of course, I'm going to double the banana and double the pancake mix because I'm making for my wife, again, for the purposes of this video, and myself. So we are in and around 60 cents for this breakfast. I will put the actual number on screen for you guys, and that's already pretty damn good. So, of course, you throw in your pancake mix. Again, for this one, it's 1/3 parts pancake mix, which is the complete version, to 1 banana, and then you end up putting in water. Now, it's very important for you guys to understand that there's a bunch of moisture in this particular banana, so you're not going to add the proportional water that is recommended. You're going to slowly add water, then mix it, and when you get to the consistency of pancake batter, what it's supposed to be, that's when you're going to move on, throw it on the pan, fry it up, have yourself some delicious banana pancakes. These are so good, by the way, that you don't even actually need syrup on them. However, if you want to throw syrup on them, go for it. I also recommend, by the way, a pinch of salt in this particular batter. Bring up all the flavors. I'm going to add salt to everything. Now, the next breakfast that I have is banana oatmeal. Do you guys really want to see me explain to you how to make oatmeal, even though the package directions couldn't be clearer? Well, I guess I will have to do it. So, of course, we add in the water as allotted. This is, I believe, 1 cup of water for 1/2 a cup of oats. Again, oats, super cheap, $5, 30 servings per container. This is from the Quaker Oats. Absolutely wonderful. And then, of course, I like to add in a little bit of butter because a lot of the nutrients in oatmeal are actually fat soluble. So you want to make sure you have that fat in there. So that is going to add an additional cost, probably 25 cents on top of everything else. And in addition to that, you want to add a pinch of salt. Now, of course, we throw the bananas on at the end because any kind of sweetener that you add to oatmeal, you want to do when it's done cooking, and then you serve oatmeal. These are the breakfasts that I use throughout the course of the week, and basically, since I don't eat breakfast every day, I'm going to price whichever one comes out to be more expensive in the final calculation as the one that I use for 4 days, rather than the one that I use for 3 days, even though the wife prefers the banana pancakes, and I definitely made that more often than I did the oatmeal. Now, just so we're clear on the pricing, the banana pancakes is 44 cents for 2 people. The oatmeal actually costs the same, which I didn't figure out until I was doing this video because of the price to servings ratio. However, there's an additional 25 cents for the 1/4 stick of butter that is thrown in the oatmeal oatmeal that is not present in the banana, which brings the oatmeal price up to 69 cents, which again was not an intentional number on my part. We will put our total cost for breakfast for the week at $4.08 based on these calculations. Now look, breakfast is done. It's out of here. It's kaput. Now let's move on to lunch, because I have the worst lunch that I made throughout the whole course of the week, and that involved me slicing up the Spam into these like long little strips, frying them up on a frying pan, which normally has excellent results, and then I used these seaweed wraps that I spent $1 on and some of my leftover rice in order to try to make little Spam sushis, because I had this in Arizona at a Hawaiian place. It was much better at the Hawaiian place, and here this just did not work for me. This was a total mess. It was a total disaster. The flavor of the seaweed that I ended up buying completely clashed, and this was an absolutely disastrous lunch, not worth the cost. The Spam, not worth the cost. So let's price this failure at a salmon sushi, because it sucks. So you have the Spam, which the remaining amount of Spam was priced at $1.70, and then you have the seaweed wrap for $1, making this lunch cost $2.70, which is $2.70 too much. So now that we got past the worst lunch that I cooked, I want to tell you about one of the best ones that I cooked, which of course was this green split pea soup. Now the split peas, super cheap, Goya brand, $1.49. That's absolutely excellent. I'm going to use the whole bag. By the way, this is going to be lunch over the course of a couple of days. So yes, we are going to price over the days that it's actually consumed. I'm going to give it about 3. And in addition to that, you can see that I have onion. I of course have garlic. These are components in almost everything that I cook. I have the Sofrito. I have the Recaito. I have the tomato sauce, which gives body to the soup. And in addition to that, I also have potatoes, although I would actually recommend that you leave the potatoes out, because the starchiness kind of thickened it up a little bit too much for my liking. However, I will recommend, if your split pea soup ends up a little bit too thick, just add water. It's totally fine. It will make it recover, because if you refrigerate this, it will get thicker, and this is the best way to deal with that. Now, in this particular recipe, I'm actually going to use 6 cups of chicken stock. Now, the way that I got this chicken stock is that I made it. I ended up taking the carcass from the whole chicken, dropping it in a pot, throwing in some onions that were barely chopped, some garlic, again, barely chopped, and some celery, simmering it in my pressure cooker for 1 hour, and then, of course, ending up simmering it a little bit more after. You would probably have to do this for at least 4 to 8 hours if you don't have a pressure cooker. Then I strained it until I had this golden chicken deliciousness, and this is what I ended up using for this split pea soup. And I used about 6 cups of the chicken stock for this. But the hero of this soup is this particular ham steak. Now, these were priced at $4, so you ended up getting 2 of them, and I used 1.5 of them in this particular recipe, and I only wish I had 3 more because they were that delicious. And although I will tell you, you can make this split pea soup vegetarian. If you do, after I told you how this ham absolutely elevated it beyond belief, then you're not my friend anymore. Unsubscribe from the channel. You're an absolute savage animal. Do not make this vegetarian. Definitely include the ham. It was 10 out of 10, first class all the way. Now, the first thing that we do is we throw in the onions. We also throw in the ham along with it, because we want both to get roasted. Again, I'm not sweating the onions. I'm actually trying to get a little bit of browning on them, not quite caramelization, because I don't want it to be too sweet. Although if it does get too sweet, you can always balance it out with seasoning later. Now, in addition to that, I throw in the Goya canned tomato sauce, and I actually throw that in directly on the pan so some of that tomatoiness gets cooked out, because what we want is the umami, and we want the thickening aspects of the tomato sauce, but we don't necessarily want tomato-ness to take over this particular soup. Now, of course, we end up throwing in our carrots, we end up throwing in our other vegetables, the potatoes in this case, although you could leave them out because they really did thicken this up. By the way, a little bit of a trick: if your soup comes out too thick, like mine did after I took it off the pressure cooker, add some water. It will fix it. And then, of course, we add our rinsed split peas. And by the way, you not only want to rinse your split peas, you want to go through them for little pebbles and little bits of sticks or whatever, because split peas, for whatever reason, have all those things included, and you don't want to eat a little baby rock when you're eating your split pea soup. Now, again, the seasoning that I like for split pea soup is pretty much the same. I will use garlic powder. I will use some of my Sazon, my that red stuff. I will use a little bit of adobo, which is a spice blend, salt and pepper, and of course I might throw in some crushed red pepper here or there because, you know, a little bit of spice never hurt anybody. But yeah, I also want to give the caveat that you want to kind of limit your salt in the beginning. You're going to add that in later with your MSG because you want to maximize that umami. And the reason why is because this is actually going to reduce. So if you get it to the perfect saltiness when it's very liquidy, when that steam ends up evaporating off, you might end up with too salty split pea soup, and that is not desirable. So yeah, you're going to reserve some of your heavy-handed saltiness, which I should have taught you throughout the course of this video, for later on when you're actually tasting it after it's already gotten to the consistency that you want. Now, by the way, for split pea soup, you should be able to do it stovetop for maybe 30 to 45 minutes until the split peas have split and, you know, come to life and whatnot. I don't know how to describe it. It thickens up and the split peas become kind of like not mushy, but like mash. It's hard to explain, but it takes 15 minutes in the pressure cooker at pressure for it to get to the desired results. And I cook with the pressure cooker pot. Now, when it's ready, you just heap a good helping of that into a bowl and it is good to go. Oh yeah, sorry, little bonus thing. Sometimes I like to add in the celery or the carrots a little bit later in the process and let them stew in there for a little bit of extra bite. If you want some crunch in your particular soup and you don't want it to be as smooth as this one, just add that in later on in the process. If you're going to cook it for 45 minutes, add it in for the final 15 minutes. If you're going to cook it at pressure, add it in after you take it off of pressure, but let it simmer for a little bit so the vegetables get a little bit more cooked. I recommend this more with the celery rather than the carrots because the carrots take longer to cook and it might mess up your whole process. But again, this was one of my favorite meals to have, and it could be served for lunch or dinner. And by the way, you can mix and match some of the vegetables to use up what you have within reason in order to get ideal results. But again, I will emphasize 100% include the ham in there. Do not do this vegetarian, you absolute scumbags. Now, as for the split pea soup, so we have $1.49 for the split peas. We have $3 for the ham, and the reason for this is because it was $4. I used 1.5 pieces of the ham. There were 2 in the container, so obviously this is $3. I used the remainder of the ham for the beans, which we already talked about before. We also have the onion that was in there, and I'm going to price that onion because it was a whole onion at 36 cents. The garlic I will price at 20 cents because I used an amount of cloves that I didn't count, but it wasn't that many. Now, the carrots were actually incredibly easy because they were 99 cents a pound, and I bought 1 pound, so I will price that at 50 cents just for convenience. Now, the celery I bought for $1.99, but it was buy one, get one, so I should be pricing it at half price, but instead I'm going to price the 3 ribs of celery at around 50 cents, which would be close enough to the approximate if there was no buy one get one sale. Again, I told you I would be working against myself. And the potatoes were actually pretty easy because I bought 2 potatoes and they ended up coming out to a total of 58 cents. Now, we also have the Goya canned tomato sauce. I used the remainder that was left over from the beans. I debited 15 cents from the beans price before, so now I will put in the remaining 35 cents. And I actually did not use the Sofrito or the Recaito, but I could have used it and I would have enjoyed it had I used it, so I will add in the 71 cents for that, even though it was not in the actual recipe that I ended up eating, because again, we're trying to give me the biggest disadvantage humanly possible. Now, that brings us to a total for this split pea soup of $7.69, which again, on its own would be too much for one meal, but I ended up eating this over the course of 3 days, which prices this meal in and around $2.57 for 2 people over the course of 3 days, which is not bad, especially how good it came out. Now, of course, off the high of that split pea soup for lunch, I ended up having this pork loin for dinner, which was definitely a low. These are pre-seasoned pork loins. Sometimes I get them when they're on sale, when I want to take something out really quickly, not do any effort, toss it in the oven, roast it according to package directions, and then take it out and enjoy it. And the seasoning for this particular one was just not good. I've had better luck with the sea salt one because you could add whatever, it's just pre-salted, or with the teriyaki one, which I found to be actually pretty good. But this one right here, this particular flavor, I am not about it. But yeah, I roasted it according to package directions, and then of course I sliced it up, and of course I had to eat it over the course of 3 days because this is a lot of pork loin, and my wife took advantage of the fact that we had the split pea soup to actually eat some of that for dinner rather than this, but we still price it in as if we ate it for the full 3 days, both of us, even though she rejected it and I had to eat more of it, even though I think I liked it less than her. Now, by the way, I also roasted some broccoli, which I can't find the footage of, and I was eating that throughout the week, and basically what I did was I put broccoli on some parchment paper, ended up salting and peppering it heavily, using olive oil to make sure everything clings to it, and I roasted it for 30 minutes at 400 degrees in the oven, and throughout the week I would have some vegetables on the side in order to supplement these particular meals. So yeah, footage missing right here, and of course when I realized that I didn't have any footage of it, I took a photo of it, but I had already eaten a significant portion of the broccoli before I realized that I wasn't capturing it. Now let's price this out as one meal. The broccoli cost me $2.92. I had another 2 cups of rice that were made on this particular day, so that will be priced at 95 cents as is before, and the pork loin was $6.99. That gives us a grand total of $10.86, and again, this served as a meal for 3 days, just like the other one, and that gives me a dinner total for $3.62. Not bad, although again, the pork loin, not that great. Now on to the next thing, which is another lunch, another soup, and it's red lentil soup, and I absolutely love this as well. And essentially, after the wife recommended the split pea soup, I decided in my brain parts that, hey, maybe I should do a different kind of soup, maybe with a different color, and I vaguely remembered from possibly a Greek girl that I might have saw in the past, this recipe for a Mediterranean-ish style red lentil soup. But the thing is, I had a no recipe rule, so if this is not actually Mediterranean, everybody just calm the F down. I learned it somewhere in the recesses of my mind, and here's how it went down. First things first, same as with the split peas, you want to rinse them, you want to go through them in order to pick out the pebbles and all of that, because they could be in there as well. But onions down, again, very simple, very basic. After that, we end up throwing in the garlic, we have the carrots, we have the celery. Again, maybe this is not the full Mediterranean thing, but everybody relax. We also add in the Goya tomato can. Now, I actually believe that this recipe calls for tomato paste in its original origin, but I did not buy tomato paste, so I ended up having to use this. Same deal, we're going to try to let this cook down, and then we're going to add water because I used all my chicken stock for the split pea soup, and I used it for the rice, so I don't have any more left, and we're going to bring that to a simmer. Now look, everything that I make has salt and pepper in it, and I'm salting and peppering and tasting constantly, but in this particular recipe, for whatever reason, I felt like it needed to have cumin specifically in it. So cumin went into this a lot as a seasoning that I'm going to say is mandatory because it came out really good. Now, also you will notice that this particular pot, too small. So I had to transfer it to my pressure cooker pot, and then I ended up finishing it off in there, and it came out absolutely wonderfully, and I don't even think I added MSG to this particular recipe, but I also decided that I was going to make pita bread with this, and the pita bread actually dipped in there made this a whole other level of good. Now again, the decision to make pita bread in this particular case was probably one of my most genius and stupid decisions because I also imposed a no recipe rule on myself, which makes no sense at all. And over the past couple of months, I've actually been experimenting with not only pita bread, but naan, and the recipes are quite similar, if not identical, especially since I don't use the yogurt in one of them, which I can't remember because I still haven't looked up which recipe I was actually using. So I had to do this all from memory. And again, when you're baking and everything has to be precise, this is not very good. However, it did come out as a coherent recipe, so I think all to the good. Basically what I did first and foremost is I got myself some lukewarm water. Now, I actually temperature checked this because I knew it had to be above 100 degrees, but I think below 120 degrees. And again, you could just feel this out. This was the water temperature from the middle position on my sink. Very easy to do. And in that water, you're going to throw 1.5 teaspoons of yeast and 2 teaspoons of sugar. Now, this could have been 2 tablespoons of sugar in the original recipe, but for whatever reason, I felt like it needed to be 2 teaspoons of sugar. Now, I actually let that ferment for like 15 minutes. What happens is the yeast ends up feeding off the sugar in order to grow and expand, and while that was going down, I ended up getting myself 2 cups of flour. Now, bread flour is more expensive and not what I used in this particular case, but it's definitely preferred from my past experience. I ended up using this flour, which was $3.49 for a 5-pound bag. Now, I also added salt salt because of course I did, and in addition to that, I added dried thyme throughout the course of this. And again, there's no measurements here. I just felt it out. I wanted to see the little leaves in every little bit of the pita, so I added a fair amount of thyme in this particular recipe. And of course, I added olive oil because I was thinking to myself, Greeks do olive oil. This seems Mediterranean. So I threw that in there for some additional olive oiliness. Now, here's the thing, and I need to tell you guys this, everybody out there in the audience, I genuinely thought for a good 1 to 2 minutes about kneading this dough by hand. But the thing is, my wife has had a stand speed mixer since before we were married, and I got a bread maker with a dough function as something that was a wedding gift. So there was no way in hell I was going to knead this by hand for you guys just for demonstration purposes, when I knew if I put this in the bread maker and hit the dough button, it would come out perfectly kneaded. So your guys are just gonna have to deal with the fact that you gotta knead it, and then you gotta cover it in plastic and let it rise for an hour. I'm sorry, that's something that is on you. It is not on me to show you how to do this. This is not a cooking video, despite the fact that I'm dropping all these different various recipes. Anyway, after it was done, I ended up rolling it out flat and I cut it into 8 components. I then balled those into little dough balls, and then I rolled them out flat into the pitas, threw them on a pan that was greased with butter, and then you see the beautiful pita rise, and it was just amazing. It's great combination, 10 out of 10, first class all the way. My wife absolutely loved it. This, in addition to the split pea soup, was one of my better decisions throughout the course of the week. Alright, let's price out this red lentil soup. So unlike the split peas, these were actually $1.99 for the red lentils. And then we have the 36 cents for the onions, 20 cents for the garlic. We're going to go 50 cents for the celery. We're also going to go 35 cents for the Goya canned tomato sauce. And we will add 50 cents for carrots, which brings us to a total of $3.90. And as for the pita bread, look, the flour was 4 cents an ounce. We had about 11 ounces of flour, so that would be 44 cents. There was also some yeast and also some salt or whatever. Honestly, I'm just going to add $1 for it, because if you use the bread flour, which I recommend, which is a little more money, closer to 70 cents an ounce, then with the yeast and a little bit of the butter to grease the pan, you'll end up at around $1, which brings our total to $4.90. And then you divide by 3, and that will give you $1.63 per day for that lunch. Now, the final dinner that I had up in my repertoire was, of course, the stuffed pepper, where I ended up using ground turkey, which was this Nature's Promise ground turkey that was on sale for $2.99 for 1 pound. And considering this is like the organic, they let the turkey, I don't know, take baths and hang out with its friends kind of ground turkey, this was an excellent price for this. I also got 2 red peppers at 88 cents a pop. Use both of them, and I cooked this as follows. And you will be unsurprised by the fact that the first thing I did was throw down onions into the pan. I also threw down some garlic, also threw in the carrots. Again, all to make this mixture. Seasoned it, added it, of course, my tomato sauce, added, of course, my Sofrito and Recaito, added my salt, pepper, MSG, different various seasonings, including oregano, crushed red pepper, because we like a little bit of spice in there, and a bunch of other things to taste in order to get a mixture like this. And you want the mixture to be a little bit liquidy. On the flip side, I ended up taking the peppers, cutting off the head of the peppers, going in there and cutting out all that like white stuff, because that gets bitter, and then I seasoned the inside of that with salt and pepper. And I actually forgot to throw a little bit of olive oil in there, which is my bad. And then I roasted those peppers separately, open, in a tray, standing up at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes until they were like soft but still retain their shape. So then I took the pepper out of the oven, which by the way would go in before I started working on the ground turkey, so a little bit of a continuity error there. Let it rest for a little bit, get cool, and then I started plating by dumping the turkey mixture inside the pepper, which came out really, really good. And it was definitely a nice little combination to have the stuffed pepper, the rice, and the Roman beans all put together on a single plate, and I highly recommend it. So let's price this particular dinner out. So we have $2.99 for the ground turkey. We have $1.29 for the carrots, because if you guys noticed in my initial photo and earlier on in the split pea soup, I actually bought a bag of baby carrots, which I was supposed to use here, but I ended up using in the split pea soup. Then I had to go to the store and buy regular carrots. So in this particular instance, I'm pricing in the $1.29 for the pound of baby carrots right here. We also have 36 cents for the onion, 88 cents for one pepper, 88 cents for another pepper. Then we have 35 cents for, again, the tomato sauce, and of course 20 cents for the garlic. This gives us a total of $6.95, and then we will add in the cost of the beans, which is $3.89, plus 2 cups of rice, which is 95 cents, which is $4.84. I'm just going to price this in as is without dividing by 3, although I will note that I did have leftover rice that continued into the next week because I made 6 cups total, and in addition to that, these are the beans that I would carry through the rest of the week. So obviously this is the second can of beans, but whatever. We're just going to price this in at $11.79. If you want a more accurate calculation, it's around $8 for this particular meal. But we're so close to the end, we're going to get our grand totals, and this will make the math easier over the course of the whole week. Alright, so now that we've gone over everything I ate throughout the course of this particular week during this particular food stamp challenge, I think it's important for us to figure out how much this all costs. What was the budget per day for all of these different meals, and whether or not I actually defeated the food stamp challenge. But let us remember, we have a budget of $84. That means we have to get in and around $12 per day in order to beat this challenge. Now, first on our list was our chicken, rice, and beans. That was priced at $10.94. Next up on the list, I added up the totals of all the breakfasts, which was $4.08. Then we had our terrible spam and seaweed lunch at the price of $2.70. Then we had $7.67 for the split pea soup, which was absolutely wonderful. And then we followed that up with the pork loin, broccoli, and rice combination at $10.86. Then we had the red lentil soup for lunch, which was $4.90. And we followed that up with $11.79 for the stuffed pepper and the rice and beans. And that gives us a grand total of $52.94. $52.94. That is $31 underneath the budget of $84 for 2 people for a week, and I didn't even eat all that different than I normally do. This is the power of being a Latino, everyone. Respect on my name. I absolutely devastated this challenge, and by the way, that means the daily cost of these particular meals, $7.56. So basically, I not only came in under budget for the food stamp challenge, I damn near beat the challenge feeding 2 people on the budget of 1 person. And by the way, I did all of this with additional restrictions without going to the dollar store, and this is based on New York City prices. Now, of course, I took advantages of sales, but like I said, with the bag of rice or other items that I expected to go there and find a sale, when it wasn't on sale, I didn't buy it. I also ignored a bunch of store brands, which are perfectly fine, by the way, because I wanted to make it more difficult, and this was the total that I showed up with. If I actually went and decided to buy everything on sale or store brand the hell out of this, I might have actually come under budget for the price that they allocate for 1 person while feeding 2 people. And of course, unsurprisingly, I ended up winning the challenge. Now, of course, I already knew I won the challenge because I went to the store, I bought the stuff, and then I have a copy of my receipt, and it says it was below that certain amount. But unsurprisingly, I absolutely obliterated this particular challenge. But I do want to say I didn't learn nothing from this particular experience. So first and foremost, we talked about the flaws in the premise before earlier in the video. But that being said, when you don't have money, and I was in this position for a long period of time in my life, and you have to plan meals like this, it just requires more thought, requires leaving stuff behind, and I really wanted to have ground beef or some kind of beef in relation to this particular challenge, but at the time that I went to the store, it was just way out of the price range, and that sucks that certain Americans just can't have beef because of their limited budget, even though I understand that hopefully those times will be temporary as they were for me. In addition to that, whenever you pick ingredients like certain vegetables, you're trying to think how you can apply that to multiple different things, and that was something that I was working through when I was going shopping, when I was pre-planning and whatnot, when I was scouting stuff out. I also learned when I tried to buy the cheap bag of rice and ended up buying the much more expensive rice that sometimes you go to the store, there's something that's an absolute necessity, you choose the store because of that sale, and of course it backfires. Now, of course, I've seen this before, this has happened to me before, but it's a little bit of a refresher of like where I came from, even though again I wasn't on food stamps, and the struggles that you have to deal with when you don't have all the money to buy food, but it's also doable. doable. And I think it's important for people who actually engage with this challenge to actually try to do it, to actually try to prove it's possible, because each and every day Americans across this country feel adversity. They struggle, but they get through it. They endure it because they're not meek little victims or cowards or somehow unable to stand up to the task. There are people who are raising themselves out of poverty in a lot of cases, and they're enduring all the hardships in order to have a better future. That's what I ended up having. Again, I struggled with getting food and whatnot. I made the bad choices. I made the not practical choices when I was out shopping, but I wanted to make sure that I was able to feed myself and, of course, help my family, because I started buying groceries for the family when I was 19 because I thought it would be more efficient if I did it, and it ended up leading to greener pastures in the future. So yeah, if you're struggling out there, if you're enduring on a low food budget, then you can get through this. Here's a bunch of recipes. Like I said, they will be written out in the description that you can utilize in order to move forward, in order to be successful, in order to eat relatively decently. I mean, I could have had more vegetables, if I'm being perfectly honest, a little better variety in fruit, because it is doable. Although, of course, it does hurt that people are struggling so much in this particular nation, even if, again, the challenge itself is not all that legitimate. Now, in terms of the regrets of the meals that I chose, the Spam that I bought was just not useful, if I'm being perfectly honest, and I could have cut it out and saved some money and just had a better experience overall. And I'm talking to somebody who appreciates myself some Spam, but also the pork loin that I picked, I was not about it. I could have bought pork chops, but one of the restrictions that I put on myself was I had to do a set it and forget it kind of meal, and that was it. So for what it was perfectly fine. And if you like that flavor, you can go with it. I would just leave without it. And also, I would probably get more kinds of soups and think more in the line of soup. However, my wife made me think of that after the fact, so I actually had to go back in order to get the lentils and the split peas, and I don't regret that at all. That was definitely 10 out of 10, made this experience so much better. But of course, I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. Are you taking up the food stamp challenge? Do you think you can beat it? Or are you a coward who is just impressed by how amazing I am? All your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me with support links in the description of this video. This has been me taking on the food stamp challenge and winning. Till next time.